Every time we enter a new year, the conversation begins again in the media, online, and at the workplace, whether we should celebrate a public holiday on January 26. We all know why the date was chosen and why many people refer to it as Invasion Day. If you don't, click on the link in the description to find out more from Deadly Stories. What I didn't know, and let's be honest, most white people don't know, is a long history of resistance that has occurred on this date. All these events in just the last 100 years, long before January 26 was made a public holiday in just 1994. All the information in this video has come from Deadly Stories, Creative Spirits, NAIDOC, and AATISIS. AATISIS? I've decided not to refer to the official website for the public holiday because they've been called out for propaganda, misleading slogans and information. Shocking. Before the 1920s, on January 26, Aboriginal rights groups were boycotting what was then known as Anniversary Day, in protest against the status and treatment of First Nations people. Sorry, Sky News, Channel 7 and all the online trolls, but being against Australia Day isn't a new thing, and the divide in opinion isn't because of the media. These groups realised that every year their boycotts were largely being ignored by the broader public, who were basically being ignorant to their claims. They realised that if their movement was going to make progress, it needed to be active. The two main organisations that emerged were the Australian Aborigines Progressive Association, AAPA, in 1924, and the Australian Aborigines League, AAL, in 1932. In 1935, the leader of AAL was William Cooper. Now make sure you remember this face and the name. It's going to be very important later. He made a huge statement by drafting a petition to send to King George V, asking for special Aboriginal electorates in federal parliament. It was sent to England because the Australian government believed the petition fell outside of the constitutional responsibilities. It's almost like if a Prime Minister was on holiday in Hawaii while the country was on fire. When he comes back, people ask him why he didn't do more. He says, I can't hold a hose. The other group, APA, with this famous photo we should all know, was an all-Aboriginal body formed in 1937, with Jack Patton as president and Bill Ferguson as secretary. The next year, on January 26, 1938, the 150th anniversary of the First Fleet landing, over 1,000 Aboriginal people marched the streets of Gadigal country, also known as Sydney, ending at the Australia Hall. This was one of the first major civil rights movements in the world, and it was known as the Day of Mourning. Following the march to Congress, a deputation led by William Cooper was presented to Prime Minister Joseph Lyons with a proposed national policy for Aboriginal people. And once again, this was rejected because the government didn't hold constitutional powers for First Nations people. The successful turnout for the Day of Mourning, teamed with the unsatisfying result from the Prime Minister, created a growing feeling that this should be a regular event. In fact, AATIS states that it became the inspiration for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander activism throughout the remainder of the 20th century. Every year, the Day of Mourning became an annual event on January 26, to the point that in 1940, AAL was able to persuade many religious dominations to make the Sunday before Australia Day as Aborigines Sunday, also known as Aborigines Day. This continued until 1955, when Aborigines Day was shifted to the first Sunday in July, after it was decided it shouldn't just be a day of protest, but also a day to celebrate Aboriginal culture. In 1956, major Aboriginal organisations, a number of church groups, state and federal governments all supported the formation of National Aborigines Day of Observance Committee, the very first NAIDOC. Until in 1991, they came to include the Torres Strait Islander people, to what is now known as NAIDOC. Now back to the 1960s, both the AAL and the APA would reform, reshape, and become the driving force calling for a constitutional referendum that would take place May 27th, 1967. This was the landmark victory that William Cooper had been fighting for over 30 years, since January 26 in 1938, when Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people weren't considered as humans on this land. The man is a legend. He's basically our Martin Luther King Jr. So why aren't we talking about him? This brings me to 1984, when NAIDOC suggested that Sunday 3rd of July be made a national public holiday to help celebrate and recognise the rich cultural history that makes this country unique. The idea was declined by the government, and to this day, NAIDOC still hasn't got its own public holiday. There also isn't one for Reconciliation Week at the end of May. And yet there are public holidays for carnivals, football grand finals, and animal abuse. Oh, and the theme for NAIDOC this year is Get Up, Stand Up, Show Up, which seems pretty damn relevant. The history of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander activism and all the incredible people that made a change should be spoken about and recognised. It's time we celebrated the true heroes of this country. Those who fought for what is right, not just what is white. From the first day of mourning on January 26, 1938, the Aboriginal Tent Embassy, Redfern, the bicentennial protests of 1988, and all the other important events that us settlers don't teach. Let's start talking about William Cooper, Jack Patton, Bill Ferguson, Eddie Mabu, and Pearl Gibbs, just to name a few of the First Nations people who completely changed history in this country, and learn stories that happened before 1788. Personally, I don't know if we deserve a national holiday, since we've got a long way to make things right and create reconciliation. But I do know that I would rather my nephew celebrate the longest living culture than whatever this is. Thank you for going beyond a thought in January 26. Make sure to follow all accurate sources like Indigenous X, NITV, and Clothing the Gap to make sure you're always in the know. Show up to the Invasion Day protest this year if you can, and support black businesses wherever possible. Let me know in the comment section anything I've missed or anything I could have added. Make sure to like this video to help in the algorithm, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell notification to stay notified for all my next videos.